Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Today we'll be talking about economic restructuring and what it means for the future. My guest today is Dr. Heather Stevens. Dr. Stevens is an Assistant Professor of Economics. Welcome, Heather, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today.
As we start this conversation, we should probably define what we mean by economic restructuring for the benefit of the viewers.
Okay.
Economic restructuring typically means, in the conventional understanding, of a society which transitions from a manufacturing, industrially based economy to a service-based economy. And obviously things can happen when that transformation occurs. One of the things that happens is that jobs in the industrial manufacturing base are lost. Do those jobs that are lost in manufacturing ever actually come back?
Well, usually not at the scale that they were there before, but there's lots of evidence on a small scale manufacturing, jobs are being created all over the U.S. So, when we think of manufacturing, we think of let's bring in the next employer that's going to hire 3,000 plus new workers. But what we're really more competitive now in sort of what I would call traditional manufacturing hubs in the U.S. is we can still produce some stuff on big scale. We're not losing everything. And then there's these smaller kind of what I would call innovative, entrepreneurial type manufacturing shops that are opening up. So there is some opportunity there, but we're not going to replace a 3,000 person plant with another 3,000 person plant. I just don't see that happening in most of these cities.
So what you're really talking about is the development of niche-based manufacturing or production enterprises, maybe machine shops and things of that nature.
Yeah, and you see it. I mean, even here in Long Beach, there have been, people opening up these kind of smaller places, and it's sort of goes under the radar screen because we're all thinking manufacturing is, thousands of new workers. They might have 5 workers or 10 or 20.
Exactly. So we're not seeing the influx of the large employers, as you mentioned. So there won't be another Boeing or McDonnell Douglas that will come to Long Beach and generate 35,000 jobs.
Well, I would be really surprised, especially in Southern California, because the cost of real estate alone is enough to drive that employer somewhere else. If they're already not here, the chances that they're going to come here is pretty slim. Maybe in a place like Detroit, where real estate is extremely cheap and you have a labor base that has worked in manufacturing, maybe there's something long-term they'll be able to recruit. But I don't see it here in Southern California.
And I'm glad you brought up Detroit because I wanted to engage for a moment in A Tale of Two Cities, with my apologies to Charles Dickens if he's up there somewhere listening to us. But The Tale of Two Cities involves Detroit and Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Detroit and Pittsburgh, both industrial titans in the past. Pittsburgh, of course, with the steel mills, and Detroit, of course, having the auto manufacturing factories that they had. What can you tell us about that? I can also tell you can tell us about Pittsburgh because you've done some research. What happened with Pittsburgh?
Well, so just like you said, they lost a lot of jobs. They lost, I think in one decade, over 100,000 jobs in the steel industry. And instead of letting that ruin their city, they really came together. The city came together and they figured out, well, this isn't coming back. We need to figure out how we can do something else with our city. And they've really transitioned their city into this sort of education, medical research sort of hub. And in addition to having a lot of sort of infrastructure from the heyday of being a steel town, so they have the arts and the culture already in place, they've been able to transition themselves into a modern city that is actually doing quite well today.
And the contrast with Detroit, I'm going to mention now based on a report that was written for the National Bureau of Economic Research. There were 2 researchers from Harvard University and 2 from UC Berkeley that put this report together. And they measured intergenerational mobility. And what that refers to is the ability of younger people to have the opportunity to duplicate the economic success and status of their parents. And they do this through the mobility of the job market and also the housing market and so forth. And based on that study, they determined that Pittsburgh was actually second in the nation of the top 50 regional areas. Pittsburgh second, Detroit not doing quite so well, 46th out of 50. What can we glean from that study, and is this a major concern, this intergenerational mobility problem that we're reading about?
Well, in terms of the Detroit and Pittsburgh example, I mean, I think that, as I just mentioned, Pittsburgh has found a way to transition itself into a very different city than it was before. Yet it has a smaller population and a lot of housing available, so that keeps the cost of living relatively low. And so you're talking about a place with opportunity, but also with the cost of housing being relatively low, and that makes it possible to keep your standard of living up. I think what happened in Detroit is it didn't happen all at once. So you had this slow drain of jobs and no sense of urgency. And now suddenly it's all come to a head there, and they haven't had the time that Pittsburgh has. If you talk to the leaders in Detroit in Pittsburgh, or read what they say this didn't happen overnight. This happened over 30 years of us transitioning. So, Detroit may still get there, but we'll have to come back and look at where they are 20, 30 years from now. We can't expect them to do this overnight. Pittsburgh didn't either. But in terms of the intergenerational mobility, it is a big issue. Especially right now, we've been in this period of economic sort of stagnation. We're not really growing, we're not really declining, but there's not a lot of new jobs being created. There's some, but not enough to keep up with the demand for jobs. And so if you can't get a full-time job, you can't get a job at all. If you're living in an expensive cost of living place like Southern California, you can't even think about buying a house if you're not feeling secure in the job market, and that leads people to not be able to duplicate the sort of their parents' standard of living.
Exactly. So intergenerational mobility does have some acute aspects of it that we see here in Southern California because of that very expensive real estate, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. Okay. But as far as manufacturing is concerned, you made a very good point that this transformation doesn't occur overnight, particularly with manufacturing leaving the area. You usually have 20 to 30 years of this slow drain, as you mentioned, which happened in Detroit. And also in Pittsburgh. But we have seen a trend of manufacturing leaving through outsourcing to other countries overseas. That's been a big hot potato politically. But jobs also migrate around the country. If you're an employee and you're in Southern California and you lose your job in manufacturing, it doesn't really matter to you whether it goes to China or India or whether it goes to Texas or Florida or South Carolina. If you're not able to follow that job, you're out of a job either way. And we have seen manufacturing drifting to the south, to states from Texas to Florida. And in aerospace in particular, we've seen that here in Southern California. We had in 1991, I remember visiting the local aircraft plant, which was McDonnell Douglas at the time, now Boeing. They had 35,000 employees there, and they were producing two lines. One was the military line, one was commercial aircraft. And today, Boeing is down to one line of production, which will come to an end within a year, 5,000 employees. So right there, we've lost 30,000 jobs in aerospace manufacturing over that 25 year period. Long Beach has made a transition. I know that you do a review of the local economy every year. Our top 5 employers include the city, the school district, Cal State Long Beach, Memorial Healthcare, and Boeing is still hanging in there with about 5,000 employees. What can we say about the local economy here and our ability to make that transition?
Well, you mentioned some of the areas where we are strong in terms of healthcare and education, and I don't see that going away. With the healthcare reform being implemented now and more people getting health coverage, the sort of importance of having a good health infrastructure and the associated growth related to that is one that I think that Long Beach and the surrounding communities are going to benefit from a lot. even though it doesn't show up in your top employers, we can't obviously forget the importance of the port. So the port itself may not have as many employees because, but all the associated businesses that are located right next to it and all the people that work there and the trucker, people that drive the trucks in and out, I mean, that is a huge employment base in this area. And I don't see that going away, although it is, it is sensitive to downturns in Asia, since the most of the imports and exports that go out of that port do go to or from Asia.
Well, our port is certainly one of the bright spots of our local economic development. We're well positioned, along with the Port of LA, to bring those goods in. So that's probably going to be here for a while.
Yeah, I would say that, especially with all the new investments that they're making in the port, with the new bridge and a lot of the sort of environmentally friendly things they've been doing, as well as just sort of being able to take the biggest ships and everything so that they can continue to be competitive. I definitely think that will be a big driver of the local economy. Healthcare will be. Education's not going to go away. The need for education. Will it be a growth area? I'm not sure about that, but it will be a stable area. And so those are things we have going for us. And I think that having that big sort of education base between Long Beach City College and Cal State Long Beach, we are training people. We are, we're sort of building the human capital of the local region. And so that is an opportunity to capitalize on some of that and use that for growth in the area in sort of other industries that maybe we haven't even thought about yet.
We just have a minute or so before the break, but I'd like to explore another area, which is energy development. We know that in the United States, one of the fastest growing industries at the moment is the hydraulic fracturing, referred to as fracking boom, that's occurring across the United States, largely in Texas, North Dakota, Colorado, and Wyoming. I know that you had the opportunity to spend some time in Wyoming between job assignments back around 2003. So you've seen the Wyoming economy up front and close. And what did you determine based on what was going on in Wyoming with previous energy booms and busts? What can we learn from that?
Well, so I was fortunate. I actually worked as a local economic development director there, and so I was pretty highly involved in the regional economy there. And one thing that they've done right is they used to be very susceptible to these booms and busts, and they wouldn't sort of, what I would say, take advantage of the fact that in the boom times they bring in more money than they need, and in the bust times they're hurting. So what they've done is they save for the bust times, and they also invest for the bust times. So in the boom times, they build new schools, they fix their roads, they do all the things that you need to do occasionally. And then in the bust times, they have a sort of cushion when their revenue's down, because their economy, unlike many other states, is heavily dependent on the revenues from the oil and gas industry, since they don't have an income tax.
We have to take a break at the moment.
Okay.
So we'll be back with the next segment of this program, and we'll talk about the labor participation rate and some concerns about it dropping. Stay with us.
The environment is my passion. That's why I enlisted in the Coast Guard. Now, I serve to protect the environment and defend my country.
Were you born ready for a greater challenge? Find out at gocoastguard.com.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly. My guest today is Dr. Heather Stevens, and we're talking about economic restructuring. Heather, before the break, we talked about the energy boom that's currently, I guess we could use the term, raging across America right now. There's some concern that booms do go bust. You mentioned the experience of Wyoming, which is one of the areas where we do have a large energy boom at the moment. Let's transition a little bit and talk about green energy. Green energy, sustainable energy, renewable energy, goes by a lot of different names. But when this was originally presented to us as a nation, we were told, well, there's the opportunity to create lots of jobs with green energy. But truth is, we have found that, and not just in America, but across the world, that it does not create a lot of jobs. It's not a job generator. But even though it's not a job generator, are there some good reasons for us to invest in and participate in a robust renewable energy system? Is that helpful for the economy?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, I think if we want it to be a job creator, then it's not going to be, as you mentioned. But we have had to go into these new technologies like hydraulic fracturing because we need more oil to sustain our economy because we're using so much of it. And at some point, it's going to become more expensive and even harder. New technologies are not going to make it so easy for us to continue to extract these resources. And if we want to see a sustained long-term economy, we need to be thinking about, having energy sources that are sustainable, and not just for the environmental reasons, which are another good reason to be thinking about it, but also just for economic reasons, because you want to make sure you're going to be able to continue to, turn on your lights and power up your computer and run your air conditioner or your heater every single day. So if we don't find some sources that allow us to do that, then eventually we'll tap out these new sources, and then we'll be forced to find something else. So if we start investing today, we can run on these parallel paths and start weaning ourselves slowly off of sort of traditional energy sources onto newer ones.
Okay, and let's talk about something that I teased before the break, and that's the labor participation rate. And we've seen that recently, actually over the last 5-6 years, we've seen a drop in the labor participation rate. In fact, the most recent studies indicate that we're at the lowest level of labor participation since 1978. And a lot of people are troubled by this. Why is this a troubling sign for the economy?
Well, two things. I mean, in 1978, you had way fewer women in the workforce. So if now we have a lot more women in the workforce, and we're back at the labor participation rate, which means the percentage of, sort of working age people who are working or looking for a job. And then I think that's what people don't understand, is the labor force participation includes the people who have said, I'm unemployed and I'm looking for a job. So when you're not in that, you've either retired or you're on disability or whatever, or you've just given up. And so if you've just given up on looking for a job, that means you're not even thinking about working, and you're kind of out of the economic engine of society, and that can be pretty problematic if it includes people who have skills and that want to contribute to society but have sort of think there's no hope.
Right, and also in addition to those that are not in the workforce, not participating in the labor force, we also have a problem today with folks that are working part-time jobs that would prefer to have and would like to have full-time jobs. That amounts to, according to the latest statistics, about 5% of the labor force, or about 7 million people, have these part-time jobs. What about that group, and is there hope for them to eventually transition to full-time work?
Well, it depends, obviously, on what industries they're in. I mean, in some cases, these are people getting their foot in the door, and if the economy gets better, I do think there are opportunities for them to transition in. Some of these are, low-skilled workers, and, it may be cheaper for companies to just have a lot of part-time workers because they're easier to let go if things don't get better. And I think that that's part of the reason we have a lot of part-time workers right now, is that we are kind of, the economy isn't quite going. We're not quite seeing it go. It's looking a little better, and a few employers are willing to take a risk and hire some new employees. But some employers who have had part-time workers are kind of waiting to see if the economy gets better. As long as you're working, you at least are getting some experience. The group I'm more concerned about are sort of the young people who are either graduating from high school or technical school or with a 4-year degree and aren't able to find a job. And the longer they go unemployed, and then that can be a huge issue. So the sort of unemployment without any experience is worse than working part-time. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to address some of these part-time workers. But if it was a homogeneous group, if they're all in sort of the same boat, it might be easier to say what's going to happen.
Right, and so you've brought up we're back to the intergenerational mobility issue as well, in talking about folks that graduate from high school or graduate from college, can't find work. they're not getting on in life, they're not on the pathway to success as a result of that. And maybe we should take a look at our educational system and our educational policy in this country. And I'm going to be a heretic. I know I work for the university, but I'm going to say this. Not everyone needs a 4-year college degree. And our economy needs people that are specialized, that are technicians, that have skills that maybe require technical school but not a university degree. What about that? What should we be doing with our educational policy?
Well, I think you make a really good point. I mean, there sort of was this trend about 30 years ago where we decided that everyone needed to start getting a 4-year degree, and we transitioned many of our technical training programs to 2-year sort of prep programs to move on to 4-year colleges. And there are jobs. There are these, we talk about the loss of the middle class, but there are a lot of good paying, sort of upper middle class type jobs that don't require a 4-year degree. And in fact, a 4-year degree won't help you because you need some specialized training. And some people are going to graduate with a 4-year degree, not get a job, and yet would have loved some of these jobs, where they're working with their hands and they have to think like about how to fix something. And we should be encouraging those people to go and get these more sort of technical degrees that will lead to a lifetime of economic success, rather than encouraging them to struggle through a 4-year college degree, graduate, not really be the leading candidate for a job that requires a 4-year degree, and then sort of economically struggle. Students at Cal State Long Beach are really lucky because they're not burdened to the degree that many college graduates are. But if you're at a school that costs some real lot of money to go to, and you're going to come out and not get a job, why are we sending them there? We're just setting them up for failure. And I think the longer that the group that can't get jobs stays out of the workforce, the more disadvantaged they're going to be. Because what's going to happen is, if the economy improves, employers are not going to look to those people that have been sitting unemployed for 3 years. They're going to look to the new graduates.
Right.
And so you're going to have people that, if they don't get jobs soon, they're going to just sort of fall into this abyss potentially that could be a long-term problem.
Right, and you brought up a really good point that it's important to stay current in the job force, have current skills, current educational training that makes you an appropriate hire for a given industry. And as we talk about that, you do a lot of work with econometrics, which is studying things that have happened in the past. I guess there are a couple of ways to approach the economy. One is forecasting, which is kind of like looking into a crystal ball, and my apologies to economists who do a great job of forecasting. But then there's also the kind of work that you're doing, which is analyzing past trends using econometrics. Explain what that is, and how do you use it as a tool to examine our economy?
Well, I mean, basically we gather a lot of information about the economy, about, different places, and we try to look at specific sort of policy questions. So I've done some work where I've looked at how do cleaning up some environmental sort of degraded sites, how can that affect the choice of different businesses to want to locate near there, or households to want to buy houses there? Can it really transform a place or not? I've done some work looking at sort of the impact on having sort of a more entrepreneurial culture on economic growth of regions. And really it's just, trying to be very, very careful in our sort of statistical analysis of these data to try to get at the sort of the causation effect, and not just, are these things moving in the same direction? Does this actually cause this, or did it just sort of happen? And that's what we're kind of trying to do.
Speaking of causation, I said earlier we might talk about real estate and the very high cost of real estate here in Southern California. What is the causation of this high real estate? Is this simply a matter of supply and demand? We obviously live in an area that is in high demand because of the coastal access and the great weather and everything that comes along with living in Southern California. But is there something else also that's perhaps underlying all of this inflation in the real estate price?
Well, you know, a lot of people have looked at this in more detail than me, but I think there's a couple things going on. First of all, you have a place that has grown exponentially in terms of its population, you know, over the last 50 years. And it does have somewhat of a barrier in terms of the sort of the core part, because you've got the mountains and the ocean. And so you can't, like some metro areas, just keep kind of growing on land, because you either have to kind of go this way or around the mountains. You can't just, you know, kind of keep spreading. So that's one. It's just a matter of geography. Number two, you have some speculative investments, right? You have people who don't live here. Just heard something on the radio the other day about, you know, some of the sort of, you know, Asian money that's coming into the US because they want it in the US, and they're just buying up a bunch of houses and they don't necessarily live there. So if you have people buying houses not to live there, that can clearly drive up, because now the demand is actually sort of higher than the population is. And then I think the other thing is, a lot of big cities, when they grow up. Right? So you know, if you, into sort of classic urban economic theory, we talk about, you know, housing is tall near the city center, and then it gradually gets shorter, and then you have, you know, your single family homes further out. And yet here we are in the middle of a densely, you know, populated urban area, and you have, you know, a few high rises near downtown LA, a few near downtown Long Beach, maybe a couple in Santa Monica. And for the most part, we have single family homes everywhere else.
We're trying to maintain that suburban environment, but unfortunately we're out of time.
Okay.
I want to thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
And thank you for staying with us for this episode of Talking Points. Join us again soon for the next episode. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.